Hello, my name is Hakon, and welcome back, all you Zoia fans, for yet another little tutorial on the Empress effects Zoia, the almost magical patchable digital synthesizer in a little box with a unique grid interface and where the only limitation is your imagination and the CPU, of course. Now, today's patch, I came up with the idea late at night 2 days ago, and so I worked on it yesterday. Um, the idea I had was how many analog synthesizers have a knob for controlling the oscillator waveform, where it sweeps from, say, from sine wave through triangle, through sawtooth to square wave, and sometimes also from square wave and into pulse width modulation. And I was thinking it would be nice to do something like that on the Zoia, or I thought, how do I do that on the Zoia? Because that's how I usually think when I get an idea. Um, and so I did it on the Zoia. Now, it would have been a completely non-tutorial if the Zoia had used waveforms that can be changed dynamically, but as you probably know, the Zoia's oscillators, they have fixed waveforms. You create an oscillator module and the waveform is selected in the module setup, and it can be changed later, but you can't change it dynamically with other modules or values sent to it. And also it doesn't sweep between different shapes, which would have been nice. So, but if you have any lots of analog synthesizers and also wave shaping or wavetable synthesizers would normally have this kind of feature. Um, but how do you make a sort of a quasi wave sweep on the Zoia? And I've done that. I'll just show you what it sounds like before I explain how it works. So here goes. And there you have it. I thought it's quite a nice thing to have on the synthesizer because you can create those small varieties of timbre or great varieties of timbre by sweeping the waveform or by modulating the sweep of a waveform. You can change it per step of the sequencer. You can use an LFO to change it, for instance. There's so many things you can do with it. You can also, for instance, if you're using a MIDI controller, you can map it to velocity or to channel aftertouch, for instance. So there are so many interesting things you can do with this kind of patch. I think, anyway, and I hope you agree with me. So how do we do this? On the Zoia, of course, there is no wavetable creating the waveforms so that you could sweep through them easily. It does not have a waveform input on the oscillators, which would have been really nice. But instead, you have to do it in a roundabout way, which is one of those things that is quite fun on the Zoia, is how to, when you figure out how to do things, is to how you do it in a roundabout way. Within the limitations of the Zoia, of course, there are so many possibilities. So the first page here is, first of all, I have a value module that sets the frequency for the oscillators. And this is something I often do in my patches. This module is not technically needed because you could patch or you could change the frequency in every single of the oscillators. But whenever you have a single value that is supposed to be the same for several modules, it is easier to have a value module that controls the other ones, because you only need to change it in one place. And also it's easier when you patch things up, for instance, from a MIDI controller or a sequencer, etc., to have just one patch point, and then that again patches to other things. So this value module sets the note value. Currently it's a G4, and it sends it to each of these 4 oscillators. And of course, the reason we need 4 oscillators is because we now have 1 sine wave, 1 triangle, 1 sawtooth, and 1 pulse wave oscillator, the 4 different oscillator types on the Zoia. And each of these is then patched into their own VCA. And I could have patched it into an audio mixer, but I think a mixer actually uses more CPU, and also I don't need any pan controls or anything like that. It's just to adjust the relative volumes of these different oscillators, and the VCA is perfect for that. So they each have a VCA, and the magic in this patch, the way it works, is to control the volumes, the level controls of the VCAs, depending on the value of the input, the main control, the one that I controlled when I showed you the sound just now. So how does it actually work? So this is the actual workings of the patch that controls the VCAs, and we got this on one page, which I really like doing, as you know, because it also makes it easier for me to explain to you how it works when I can see everything on a single page and I don't have to flip between pages to show you how it works. So the first module up here in the corner is a value module, and that is the one that, when it gets the value from 0 to 1, is sweeping through the different waveforms. And that is in turn connected to 3 value modules and a switch. Before I explain that, I'll actually just draw you up something just to show you how I was thinking about solving this problem. So we have a value from 0. Let's see, just check it's in shot now. 0 to 1. So that is the control that I'm sweeping through the waveforms there. And we want that to control going from a sine wave at 0 to a pulse wave at 1, and sweeping through triangle and sawtooth. So as you can see, we're now dividing this value range into 3 already, and let's imagine now that we are visualizing the VCA control value we want to send to the VCA. So we want the sine wave to have a value of 1 here when we start at 0, and then we want it to go down to 0 there. So that is exactly a pure triangle. And then we want the triangle to have start at 0 and go up to 1, and then go down again to 0, and so on and so forth for the 4 different waves. So the easiest way to do this, since we're going both up and down with some values, is to split the whole thing into 3 discrete parts. Because this makes it a lot easier to do the calculations instead of having a single value now that needs to go up and then go down at a certain point. We are treating each third of this range as a separate little calculation. And in order to have the patch choose which of these is active, because if you can imagine, if we have the controller, or the calculation for creating this value from 0 to 1 for the triangle wave, if that still gets an input from wants to get past this point, you can imagine that the value would just flatten like this, and it would just be 1 for the duration of the rest of the values. So we need to chop this up into 3 different parts. And of course, we're splitting them at 0.333 and 0.666. Okay, so that's the just a little illustration there to show you. I could probably explain it in words as well, but illustrations, they usually make it a little bit easier. So the way we do this is, so now we have the 3 different parts are represented by 3 different value modules. That is not technically necessary, but I'm doing this for clarity now. And also there is a multiplier module down here and an inverter. In addition, there is one module extra up here, which is a switch. And before I go into how the switch is functioning in this patch, I'll just tell you how a switch works. A switch takes a, in this case, it's an out switch. An out switch takes a single input value, which can be changed dynamically from somewhere else. It's a patch point, but in this case, I'm giving it a value of 1. This is quite a common way to control patches, by using a value of 1 and then controlling where it goes. I certainly use it all the time. A switch additionally has a control patch point, which tells it which channels to select, and then it has a number of channels from 1 to 16. Well, I can't really see the point of a single channel switch. This one has 3 channels because we're splitting it into 3 parts now. And how the switch selects between these 3 channels is, or how it selects between any channels of any number, is it takes the number of channels and it takes 1 and divides by that number. So if you can imagine, all the control values in the Zoia are between 0 and 1. If you divide that by 3, you get that when the channel selector has an input value of 0 to 0.3333, it will select channel 1. If it gets 0.333 to 0.666, it selects channel 2, and 0.666 until 1, it selects channel 3, and you can see something is happening over there as well. And the channel selector is connected directly to the value that controls the sweep. So when the sweep is in the first third, 0 to 0.333, it sends this value over to the switch and it selects channel 1. So this is how one of the ways we split up the sweepable range into 3 equal parts. Now, of course, if you wanted to do a sweep with a pulse width modulation, which is possible, I could do that in another video if you like. Or maybe you should know how to do this if you watch this tutorial, and you can do it as a challenge to yourself. I would have 4 different channels and 4 lanes of control. So we have a switch now that sends a value of 1 to these multipliers down here. And furthermore, we have the value module that controls the sweep, sending its output to 3 different value modules, 1 for each of the thirds of the sweepable range. So before I do the next bit, I want to show you now how I'm thinking how to do this. So now we're dividing this into 3 equal parts. So that means that, for instance, we want to have the value for the triangle. Let's do the triangle wave now. It's going from 0 to 1 when the main controller is going from 0 to 0.333. So how do we do that? Well, we can take the value of the main controller and we can multiply it by 3. That's quite easy. And the value for the sine wave, we could, it goes from 1 to 0, so that is just the inverse of that. But what about the second third? Well, we can do minus 0.333, and then we multiply by 3. And likewise for the third one, minus 0.666, and then multiply by 3. The problem with this is that, and I'll show you now, value modules on the Zoia behave in a very specific way. You know that you can have a value module that goes from, the standard is from 0 to 1. Is this within shot? Yes, it is. But you can also have them go from -1 to 1 with a 0 in the middle. The problem is that if you have a value module that goes from 0 to 1 and you send its value to a value module with a negative value, something interesting happens. It converts. It still operates between 0 to 1, but it converts that to -1 to +1. So if you send a value of 0.5 from a positive only value module to a bipolar value module, it becomes 0. So this means once you start trying to create offsets with negative numbers, you have to be aware of this, because sometimes it can confuse things a little bit and get very confusing very quickly. So for instance, if I wanted to create an offset with a negative module that I added together with a value module, it would get different values than you'd expect based on those how it's split into 3 parts. Because if I did minus 0.333 now, that is the same as, let me see, I can't do this in my head now, can I? So that is 0.36-ish. So as you can see, that's a little bit of a sort of a disconnect that can confuse things very quickly when you're working with value modules. So what I've done here is I've taken the initial value of 0 to 1 and I'm converting it to a bipolar value. So the first value module here isn't really necessary, but I'm just doing that for clarity now. When the value here is 0, I want that to have a value of 0. And this is a bipolar module, which means that I have to have an offset of 0.5 on it. So basically, I adjust the initial value of this value module up to 0 when this connection is in force. And also, because I'm doing this, so I want to convert from 0 to 1 here to 0 to 1 there. And this is sort of half the range of this, which means that I also have to use a connection strength of 50%. So 50% there. And then I get a bipolar value that goes from 0 to 1 when this one goes from 0 to 1. And this allows me to have 2 additional value modules here with an offset of -0.333 and -0.6667, and also patched up with 50% to control the 3 parts of this range here. So now the second value module, when the initial controller is in the range 0.333 to 0.666, it will now be here from in this range here. And that will give a 0 to, so each of these thirds now will get an output value from these value modules of 0 to 0.333. And then, of course, we have to multiply by 3 so that each of these thirds now get a value of 0 to 1. So I hope that is clear. That is my thought process, and that works really well. I could have done it other ways, but in order to make it a little bit clearer what I'm doing, I've set the offsets now to the logical values that you expect, But in order to do that via one value module into other value modules, I have to make them bipolar, and I have to set offsets in the to create these. So there we are. So now this is at 0, and these are the offsets so this is set to 0, which technically is an offset because it starts at -1. And then let's see, get it back to 0 now. There we are. Okay. So these ones are controlling the 3/3 or sending the values of the 3/3 of the sweepable range, and they will each output a value range of 0 to 0.333 when the main controller is within their third of the range. But in order to split up these to be separate so that there is so only these value modules are active here, this one is active there, and that one active there, I am multiplying by the output of the switch so that the output of the first third, these are the, of course, the control for the first third, second third, and third third. So the values are multiplied by 1 if it is the active third as dictated by the switch, and it is multiplied by 0 if that third is not active. And that's how we avoid getting for instance, the triangle wave to be always on once you get past 0.333. Furthermore, of course, the multiplication by 3 is done with the connection strength down to this multiplier module. So we have from each of these value modules, which is now connected to multipliers, they are connected with a connection strength of 300%, because these now have an output value of 0 to 0.333 multiplied by 3, that becomes, and a little bit, that becomes 0 to 1. So now we have a value of 0, and I'll just move it up to 3333 now. And then this should then have a value of 1, and this should have a value of 1, but the other ones here should have a value of 0. If I move it 1 notch up, like so, now the first third shouldn't be active anymore, because now it's the second channel of the switch that is activated. And the first one has a output value of 0. The second one is now 0.0018, so that's the beginning of the range. And the third one is still inactive. And now we move up to, and let's just see here. So now this is the value that comes out from the second value module is 0.0006. And we move up to, let's just do 0.5 now, right in the middle. Which has an output value from the value module here at 0.1666 times 3 is 0.5, that's right in the middle. And if we move up to 0.666, we should get 665, 666. This should still be where it is, 1 output. And if we move 1 notch above now, it should be 0, because now the switch is multiplying by 0, and this has now become the active lane. So only one of these 3 chains here active at any point of time. So it creates a value between 0 and 0.333, multiplies by 3, and then it selects which of these is active, and each of these gets an output of 0 to 1 in each of the thirds of the sweepable. So I hope that is clear. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll answer them as best I can. Right, so what is happening further here? So the multipliers are creating this value. Let's just go back to something in the lower third now. So the 0.3, let's say. So At 0.3, of course, the sine wave should be almost silent and the triangle wave should be very loud. So this multiplier now outputs a value of 0.9258, which then should be the value that's sent to the VCA of the triangle wave, as you can see here. And it has an inverter. So this goes into an inverter because we also want to create a value that is 1 minus 0.9258 for the amplitude of the sine wave at this point. So that goes into the inverter, but the inverter gives us a minus 0.9258 because that's how the inverter works. It is a bipolar inverter by design. And there's no way to set an inverter to be non-bipolar, which would have been nice. It would have been nice to have the option of having just 0 to 1 as an inversion range as well. So in order to create the right value, we have to add 1 to this value to set the amplitude of the sine wave at this point. And the way I'm doing this is simply by using the channel here, the active channel output, and also patching that to the sine wave amplitude in addition to the inversion amplitude. So that means that when they add together, they give it the value. Of course, it doesn't show in control value now, but that is equal to a minus 23 dB at the moment. So this one, the triangle wave is at minus 0.67 and the sine wave is at minus 22.6. So if you now move it even further towards the breakoff point, so we go to 3, 3, and then we see that the output here from the multiplier is 0.9936, and the sine wave is down to minus 43, and the triangle is up to minus 0.06 dB. And so it works for the other ones as well. So we have, so one of them goes up, the other one goes down, and they each connect to the different one. So of course the next lane, we want the triangle wave to go down. So the inversion output is sent to the triangle wave, and the multiplier is sent to the sawtooth, etc. So yes. And I think that's about it, actually. I think that is pretty much all I have to explain here now. If that wasn't clear from that explanation, please let me know. But so we have note value, 4 oscillators, VCAs. Oh, yes, I have to explain the sound production as well, of course. So each of these VCAs send their outputs to a single VCA. So they're all merged together in a single VCA. That is controlled by an ADSR at the moment. This doesn't have to be, of course. I didn't need to use any ADSR or anything. I could have just done a pure waveform, but I just thought it's a little bit more fun just to do something. So I made an ADSR that's controlled by an LFO, but the LFO is also controlled by another LFO, so they create a little bit of a rhythm as they move together. And so actually the output of each LFO goes into the input of the other LFO. And the output of the ADSR goes to the VCA. The output of the VCA goes to a ping pong delay. And the stereo outputs of the ping pong delay go to a reverb. The reverb goes to an audio output. So, and you can see the waveform there. And that's how it's done. So thank you very much for watching. If you found this useful, interesting, helpful in any way, please leave a comment. Please also leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Join me on Patreon if you like as well, if you want to support my channel and you would like to see more videos of the kinds that I make. Another thing you can do to support my channel, by the way, which people don't think about usually, is you can add my videos to public playlists. By doing so, they become more visible and people are more likely to stumble upon them. So, the techniques and the patch method used in this patch can, of course, be used for completely different things than a wave sweep. You can imagine any kind of values that you want to fade between or change from one to the other, or in different sections of one controller. You can use the same principle as the one used in this patch. So that's just a thought for you. And I think that's all that remains for me to say, really, is goodbye for now, and I'll see you next time. So, bye-bye.